All right. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Yunus Lari. I'm an alumni of Florida Coastal School of Law. I'm an attorney. Also an admissions counselor in the Office of Admissions here at Florida Coastal School of Law, and your host for today's webinar. I just want to start by saying thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. These webinars have been growing in popularity, and that encourages me and my colleagues to up our games and keep bringing you the materials that you really want to hear about. Now, today's webinar highlight series, I'm honored to be joined by one of my own former professors, Professor Tony Colling. Professor Colling is a former U.S. Air Force JAG officer. His vast experience in the subject ranges from litigating both at the trial and appellate level and representing the Air Force in civil lawsuits to teaching at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Professor Colling was my criminal law professor in my very first semester in law school, and still to this day remains one of my all-time favorite professors. That's the truth. I hope you guys enjoyed his presentation today as much as I and my classmates enjoyed his classes back when I was a 1L law student. Anyway, as always, I encourage all of you to ask questions. You can use the chatting box to the left of your screen if you're joining us through your laptop, that is, to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions that we can fit within our time limits. Now, without any further ado, I give you Professor Tony Colling. Professor Colling, it's all yours.
Thank you, Eunice. Appreciate it. Thanks for the great introduction. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. My goal during the webinar, and I know Eunice is going to put the slides up here in a second. My goal during the webinar is to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about the various JAG Corps that are out there, what JAGs do, what kind of programs we have here at Florida Coastal, and how our veterans fit into the school, and then to give you some tips and discussion on applying for the JAG Corps once you do wind up in law school, if you're not already in law school. So let me go ahead without further ado and just give you a little bit of my JAG background. I actually started off in the U.S. Air Force as a prior enlisted firefighter, and I did that for a few years, wound up going to officer training school and was an intel officer for a few years, and then the Air Force, on the taxpayer's dollar, thank the Lord, sent me to law school. I went to the University of Florida, Levin College of Law in Gainesville, and graduated from there, and then spent probably about the next 14 years as an Air Force JAG. And I've had a lot of wonderful opportunities as an Air Force JAG. I retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2012, and then started here at Florida Coastal at that point. What you see on the screen are just some kind of sampling of things from my JAG career. I started my JAG career at Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is in California on the West Coast. Space Launch Center, that's what that rocket is launching there. Vandenberg is sort of like the Cape Canaveral of the West. And we had a very busy legal office there. While I was at Vandenberg, I, in addition to prosecuting some cases, doing some tort cases, doing some administrative law, interpreting regulations, and advising the command on that type of thing, I went over then while I was at Vandenberg and became essentially what they call the public defender of the base for criminal defense cases, known as the Area Defense Counsel. Had an opportunity to litigate several jury trials and non-jury trials, and worked with administrative discharge boards for military members, Air Force members who were being prosecuted or kicked out of the Air Force. Pretty much I was their counsel. I really enjoyed that, did that for a few years, and then went to Washington, D.C. to Bowling Air Force Base, where I was an appellate defense counsel. Now, if you know anything about law school and the moot court programs that are at law school where you get to practice being an appellate lawyer, well, essentially that's what I was doing for the next few years, representing, again, military members who were convicted at their courts martial and now we're appealing. And that's the picture that you see on the top right of the screen. That's actually the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces as they sat while I was doing this. There are 5 civilians who are judges in Washington, D.C., and they hear all of the highest level military appeals for the criminal law cases that go on there. Each service also has their own Court of Criminal Appeals. And so after a case went through the Air Force Court of Criminal Appeals, it would go up to CAF, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. So I did that for several years, really enjoyed that job. That was probably one of my favorite jobs. And then I went on to the Air Force Academy. That's the picture at the bottom left. That is the chapel over at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. A beautiful, beautiful campus. We've got a great undergraduate institution there, the equivalent of West Point for the Army. And we have a legal studies major there. So I got to teach business law, national security law, law for Air Force officers while I was there. Spent a few years there and then moved on to that picture on the bottom right is Dobbins Air Reserve Base, which is in Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, and got to work with environmental law, contracts law, and labor law and employment law issues, as well as many other things, especially working with a lot of our reserve Air Force members. And then my final assignment as a JAG was actually in D.C. litigating on behalf of the Air Force in civil cases. And that's what that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is. This was right at the time when the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy regarding homosexual conduct was being repealed. We had several high-level lawsuits leveled at the Air Force. So I was working with the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, litigating some of these cases. A really fascinating time to be part of the Air Force. So I tell you all of that really as not only an introduction to myself, but it's an introduction to the kinds of things that happen as a JAG. I mean, you can do all sorts of types of law, not just military law as you might think of it, or not even just criminal law. JAGs do a lot of different things. And so let me just spend a few minutes talking about all the different areas of law that you could expect to practice in as a JAG. In some ways, JAGs really are generalists. They do specialize in some areas, like I specialized in criminal law for several years. But no matter what you specialize in, you start off as a generalist, usually at a base level legal office, and you get to do a lot of different types of law. So again, on this slide, I've got several pictures. I'll just kind of start at the top there with the picture of the doctor. We have hospitals on every military base, or most military bases. We have medical malpractice claims when, especially, dependents of military members are suing under the Federal Tort Claims Act. So as a JAG, you could be actually helping to settle and sometimes litigate medical malpractice claims against the Air Force. To the right of that is the Clean Water Act symbol. When I was at Dobbins, I worked heavily with the base dealing with their environmental law program. Federal installations like Air Force and other military bases, they really get the brunt of environmental law because it's federally owned land. I know in California, for instance, we had an endangered species on our base, the snowy plover, a tiny little bird who used to like to nest in the sand. He would nest by just digging a little, not even a hole in the sand, and he'd lay his eggs there. Well, the problem is Vandenberg Air Force Base has 35 miles of coastline, and from March until October, the entire coastline was shut down because of this little bird doing its little nesting there. And the local community was not very happy because that was their only access to the beach. So we had to not only deal with Endangered Species Act, we had to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and in order to try to open up a very small portion of the beach so that the community could go to it. Really fascinating environmental law issues that come up in all areas. Below that, I see somebody signing a will. All JAGs will have an opportunity to work one-on-one with individual military members and their families to do what you might normally think of as sort of a general practice if you hung out your shingle in the community, doing wills, giving advice on bankruptcies, divorces, family law issues, child custody, whatever the case may be. We give that free service to our military members and their families. And so it gives you an opportunity to sort of practice a little bit like you might if you were just in the private sector in a local community, helping people with their problems. And of course, you're not charging them anything. That's part of your job. Below that is the Merit System Protections Board. That gives you an idea about our employment and labor law. That's available as a JAG. You have civil servants working for the federal government. You see President Trump has put a hiring freeze on federal civil employees. They have a lot of rights as civilian employees working on military bases. Some of them have government unions that we have to engage in labor management relations with them. And if you want to fire one of these guys, literally, they can take you to court before an administrative law judge, and you have to prove to the judge that you had good cause to fire them and that firing them was the right response as opposed to some lesser form of discipline. I mean, it really is, you're conducting a full trial just to fire an employee. So I did some of that. That's something that's a lot of fun to do as a JAG. Next to that, at the bottom there, I see Camp Delta from Guantanamo Bay. I'm sure you're aware of the war on terror and how the military has captured all these alleged terrorists, holding them in Guantanamo Bay. We have prisoner rights issues, the Geneva Conventions. Can we try these guys for war crimes using military commissions as opposed to a civilian criminal court? All of those issues, JAGs are involved with their prosecuting, their judges, their defense counsel, they're advising commanders on whether they can take certain actions against these guys. Really fascinating things. Next to that is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Again, more labor law, this time with discrimination law. You get civilian employees who are complaining about discrimination against them, whether it's sexual harassment, racial discrimination, religious discrimination. And again, we have to defend all those claims. Oftentimes they might go to a hearing, and you have to defend the Air Force or the military at one of those hearings. Next to that, you see the bombs being dropped. Operations law. When we're targeting buildings, when we're giving advice to commanders about what kind of military action they can take. All of that goes through the JAGs. And the final picture, without dragging this out too much longer, is the Federal Acquisitions Regulation. That's our contracts law. Government contracting law is an extremely complex set of contracts. There's litigation, there's negotiations, multi-million, billion-dollar contracts. Just look at how much money we're spending on defense. These are military lawyers, many times, who are reviewing these contracts and giving advice on ethics and on contracts. And honestly, I just gave you a sampling of things that JAGs do. In the center, of course, is a court-martial going on. And of course, the criminal law activity for JAGs is extremely robust, as I was telling you with my own trial and appellate experience. So life as a JAG is extremely interesting. Every day it's something new. You're changing jobs every 2 to 3 years, traveling around the country, around the world, sometimes getting deployed into war zones. But you're not getting deployed into war zones to grab a rifle and shoot at anybody. You're you're actually court-martialing people, or you are reviewing contracts, with the Iraqis as they're building schools or something like that. So it's fascinating. I highly recommend it. There's a lot of advantages to being a JAG. And so if you have an interest in this, I would highly encourage you to pursue that interest. Those of you who are students at Coastal or thinking of coming to Coastal, let me just mention one or two things about what we do here. We've got a lot of veterans who are in our student body. For the second year in a row, we've been designated a military-friendly school. In fact, we were a Bronze Award winner this year. We do care a lot about our veterans. We have an outreach program for them. We have a military law society where the veterans, some of them want to be JAGs, some of them just want to support each other or just be with each other because they share a common background. Some of them have no military background at all. They're just interested in military law. And so we have a fairly robust veterans community here. We are Yellow Ribbon participants. In fact, we do 100% matching in the Yellow Ribbon program, so that's great for some of our especially disabled veterans who can essentially get their entire law school paid for through the Yellow Ribbon program and through what we do matching, unlimited 100% matching, which is not found in many schools. And we have several courses here that are of interest to veterans. I teach a military law course. We have a veterans claims clinic where we help veterans file claims with the Veterans Administration. We have many veteran clients. We have other courses also that appeal to veterans. So just a robust environment here. We would encourage you, if you're a veteran or you're interested in this, come out to the campus, come meet some of us, and ask about what we do for veterans out here. All right, so let me just finish up with some comments on applying to the JAG Corps. I often deal with students who are interested in the JAG Corps here at Florida Coastal. One of my jobs that I didn't mention was to actually recruit for the Air Force JAG Corps. So I did that for about 4 years. What that means is I would go around to law schools in the Atlanta area, because that's where I was stationed at the time, Georgia State University, the University of Georgia, Emory, John Marshall. Those were our local law schools. And I would give, I would go to the campuses to recruit students. I would interview with them. They would come to my office when they were applying for the JAG Corps, and I would do their formal interview and then provide a recommendation to a board that was going to decide who gets to become a JAG. And these were extremely competitive positions. No matter what service you're interested in, it is extremely competitive to be a JAG. So because I had that experience, I oftentimes work with students in helping them prepare for applying to the JAG Corps. So let me just speak to that for a few minutes and then take some questions from you guys that you might have on this. First of all, let me say this. It's not easy becoming a JAG. They hold, depending on the service, every service does it slightly differently. Some of them hold 1 board a year, some of them hold 3 or 4 boards a year, and it varies from year to year. Each of them have an excellent website you can go to where they tell you everything you need to know about applying. They have the applications online, and you're going to have to go, eventually you're going to have to go and interview with a JAG who's going to see you face-to-face. And that will be the only person that you'll see face-to-face during this process. Essentially, you'll fill out this paperwork, you'll go for your personal interview, and then your written record with the recommendation from that interviewer will go up to Washington, D.C., where they will be having a board. Once again, it could be once a year or more than once a year. And you will meet that board. It's a records-only review. Usually there's a host, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people on the board, and they could be reviewing hundreds of records, and they may only have 20 or 30 slots to fill, if that. So it's not unusual for the accession rate to be 10%, 7% of those applying. So one thing I immediately tell people is this: don't get discouraged. In fact, from Florida Coastal this last year, we had a great year for the Air Force JAG especially, which is difficult to get into. One of our current students got picked up as a JAG, and then 3 of our former students got picked up as a JAG. One of them who had been out of law school for 1 year, one had been out of law school for 3 years, the other one had been out of law school for almost 5 years. So this is sometimes a process. You might apply during law school, but if you don't get in, don't let that dream fade, because unless you age out at well, for the Air Force it's essentially 35 to 38 years old, but for some of the other services it's 42 years old. So unless you age out, you can apply regularly, and sometimes you get picked up on your 3rd or 4th board. So again, I encourage you not to get discouraged. The other thing I'll say is this: if you are a first-year law student, you want to focus your efforts on keeping your grades high. Excuse me. Because one of the largest factors to get into any JAG Corps is going to be to keep your GPA up as high as possible. The higher it is, the more you're going to stand out. Now, that can't be the only thing you do, but having the grades, being in the top 20, 30, 40% of your class will definitely put you, in the market as a more marketable candidate when you go to these boards. Your LSAT score also will weigh in, but not as much as your GPA in law school. So what is it that you want to do? I honestly tell 1Ls, don't think about this right now. Focus on your studies. You've got too many other things to worry about. Get those grades in that first semester and second semester of law school. Then you will have plenty of time to apply, because you can apply, at the end of your first year of law school in some places, at the end of your second year, but most people come in at the end of their third year of law school. After they've graduated, passed the bar, then they come in through what's known as the Direct Appointee Program, or DAP. So I would say, by and large, it's our 3Ls who are going to these boards and getting picked up for the JAG course. So you're going to have time. So I tell 1Ls that, great, let's learn about this now, and then focus on your studies. Now, let me also say this. There are summer internship opportunities in all of the services. And that is one time, especially usually it's near the end of your first year, maybe around January, where you can apply to some of these programs. I do encourage 1Ls and 2Ls to look into that, because if you can get picked up in one of those summer internship programs, your chances of getting into the JAG Corps go way up, because those are essentially recruitment programs. They're bringing you in for the summer, they're paying you to be there for the summer, and essentially they're getting an extended interview period to see what kind of a team player you are, how well you collaborate with others, how well you can operate independently, how you conduct yourselves. You're going to be, as a JAG, advising commanders on very important decisions. So you need to be able to conduct yourself, professionally, in a way that is going to be taken seriously by, commanders. And so they really get a full summer to see what you're like. And if you do a good job, and most of the time people who do get picked up here do a great job, they have a much higher percentage of getting picked up for the JAG Corps eventually. So I would recommend you apply for those summer internships. Also, in your second and third year of law school, you may have opportunities at your local military installations to do externships. That's starting to open up more and more. And again, I think that's going to make your chances of getting selected at a board much higher. What are some other things you want to do? As much hands-on, practical experience as possible. And that's one of the areas where I know coastal law does very well. We have a lot of externships, clinics, giving students the opportunity to get their hands dirty in the law. Work at the state attorney's office, go to the public defender's office, get some of that experience under your belt. That will distinguish you from some of the other applicants. And if you combine that with great grades and participating in a club such as the Military Law Society and having a strong interview, you have maximized your chances of beating out most of the competition and getting picked up for the JAG Corps. So those are just a few tips that I would throw out there for you. I want to actually save some time for you guys to ask questions about various things. So let me pause here and see if there are any questions. You can type in your questions in the little chat box, and I will take them at that point. So let me just pause for a minute and see if any of you have questions before I go on. All right, so we have a question from somebody. It said, you mentioned several types of law that can be practiced in the JAG. Is this based on assignment, or is there some aspect of choice in the type of law you practice? Great question. Every service does it slightly differently. Now, I can speak from my Air Force experience. I am partial to the Air Force, I'll confess. But one of the things I really like about the Air Force model is that every new JAG, essentially what you're going to do is when you apply, you're going to put in what I call a dream sheet, where you put in all of your wish list places you want to go. And you pick, probably 8 or 10 of these places when you apply. And I do recommend you put some thought and do some research into those bases, because some bases are going to be known for certain types of law more than other bases. So let me just give you a for instance. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, Warner Robins Air Force Base in Georgia, and a base out in Salt Lake City, Utah. Those bases do a lot of logistics and acquisitions, contracts work. So it's much more likely if you get assigned to one of those bases that you'll have greater exposure to more sophisticated contracting and acquisitions law. So if that's an area that you're really interested in, you might want to go to one of those bases to start off. Some other bases may have a much heavier caseload of prosecutions. So if you're more interested in criminal law and you want to do a lot of cases, you might look for, the busier bases. But the Air Force way of doing things is we assign our new JAGs to a base level legal office, and probably for about 2 to 3 years you're stationed there, and then you'll move to a second base. And during your tour, you're probably working 2 or 3 different jobs within that base legal office. And it may be partly with your input, but it may not be with your input. But you're kind of being given an experience in several different types of law. And so the way the Air Force does it is you're sort of learning 2 or 3 areas of the law. All of their JAGs do legal assistance. So you're helping people with wills and divorces and things like that. And all of the JAGs have the opportunity to prosecute. So you're kind of getting a little bit of everything. Now, not all the services do it like that. For instance, my friend who went into the Navy JAG, his first assignment out of law school was in a Navy defense, being a defense counsel in criminal trial. He didn't have any other experience. He went right out of law school and was a defense lawyer for about 2 years, and all he did was defense criminal work. The Army does it slightly different, depending on what job you get. So it depends on your service. But in answer to your question, your first assignment, you'll usually have the least amount of freedom to choose what you want to do. And then subsequent assignments, you work with your assignments people. And I was able to essentially pick my assignment as an appellate defense counsel, teaching at the Air Force Academy, going to Dobbins Air Reserve Base. Every assignment I took was something that I put in for, and that helped develop me in the way I wanted to go. Now, not everybody was as fortunate as I was. Some people get thrown places they don't want to go. But I will say, by and large, the military tries to work with you within the constraints that they have. There are several other questions, so let me move on to the next one. It says, is it possible for active duty officers to participate in summer internships? Is there an age limit for current active duty officers? So if you are currently on active duty, I'm assuming, I guess, that you're in law school, because otherwise I can't imagine how you'd get a summer internship doing it this way. So if you're active duty in law school, I can tell you I was active duty in law school because the Air Force sent me to law school, and my summer internships were mandated on me through the program that I went through called FLEP, Funded Legal Education. We do have some reservists and guardsmen who were students that I know of who did get internships on military installations, other ones who did other things. So I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question. I think it will depend on your service and what you're doing as an active duty officer in your service. As far as the age limit, again, it's 42 years old, I think, for the Navy and the Army. The Air Force is still at 35, and I think the Marines might be at 38 years old. The Coast Guard has a tiny little JAG Corps. You almost never see them out there recruiting, but they're an excellent service. If you're interested in being a Coast Guard JAG, you really have to reach out to them because they have so few JAGs in their Corps. All right, is there an age limit to commissioning as an Air Force JAG? Yes, typically you have to commission at the age of 35. The Judge Advocate General for the Air Force can waive that up to the age of 38. So that's about where we're at. Another question. What weight does the law school you attend carry in the application process? Are applicants from certain law schools more desirable? Great question. I'll tell you the truth. Most of our JAGs do not come from Ivy League schools. If I had to say what our typical JAG is, they're probably coming from a fairly, middle of the road state school. We do have our, rare Harvard and Yale graduates, but that's not really who we're recruiting. And so there isn't a very snobbish pedigree in the JAG Corps. So when they're doing these selection boards, it's not like they're like, hey, we want to take the Harvard grad. In some ways, the Harvard grad is probably at a disadvantage because sometimes they have a reputation for not playing well with others. So I would say it's not, my law school, for instance, that I'm teaching at here at Coastal, we're a 4th tier law school we get people into the JAG Corps every year. Like I said, we just got 4 into the JAG Corps of the Air Force this year, which was an unusually good year for us, I will admit. So I would say, it doesn't hurt to go to a good school, that's for sure. What's probably more important, though, is doing well, whatever school you go to, and doing hands-on, practical, externships and clinics. And so that's why a school like Coastal can still excel in getting people into the military, because we have those opportunities for you. Next question, and this might be the last question right now. Do JAGs only advocate for the military, or can they also represent officers and or veterans against the military? Okay, so if you are truly a JAG officer, you will not be advocating against the military representing veterans, because you have a conflict of interest. Your client is the JAG, the Air Force or the Army or the Navy, whatever. So those guys who go against the military, if they're veterans, especially like filing for disability or medical retirements, I used to defend the Air Force against those cases. When I was in DC at my last job, we often had people who were injured in combat, and they thought they should have gotten more of a retirement from the Air Force than they did. They would hire a civilian counsel, they would sue the Air Force, and then I would represent the Air Force in defending them. The one time where you do get to represent individuals against the military, if you will, is when you are a criminal defense lawyer. And I did that, as I said, for several years at the trial and appellate level. You get put in your own chain of command, and you're still obviously working for the Air Force, but that's the one time where you're really representing the client, and it is the Air Force or the Army or whoever that's prosecuting. So technically you are going against the military in that capacity, but that is the only capacity when that happens. I think that's the last question I have here, and I know we're going at about 30 minutes now. I'll give you one more minute just in case there are other questions that you're thinking of. And I'll, in the meantime, just give you a few closing comments on this. Being a JAG is a great way of life. What are the downsides to being a JAG, you might be wondering? Well, I had 5 children, and I was in for 21 years. One of the reasons I retired when I did was because some of my children had special needs, and honestly, it's tough to move when your kids are in high school every 2 to 3 years. And when your kids have special needs and you got to get new doctors. So there are challenges that come with moving. I think the younger, less encumbered families, single people, they love being able to move every few years, deploying and going to Korea, going to, Iraq, whatever. I mean, they love it because it's exciting and you're doing really important work. But one of the downsides is it's hard when you're active duty to stay in one place. You're going to move a lot. And so you have to kind of be into that. But you know what? Some of our JAGs come in for 4 years and then they get out and they're very marketable in the private sector. So just because, you want to be a JAG doesn't mean you have to stay for 20 years. I would say most of our JAGs don't stay for 20 years. They stay for 4, 6, 8, 10 years. What is the other downside? You're in the military. People are going to tell you what to do sometimes. You're going to be asked to do things, and you might not have an option, and you're going to have to be disciplined and keep yourself in shape. You got to stay fit, and you have to be able to take orders and say yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and live within a military structure. And some lawyers, believe it or not, they don't have that in them. So if you're one of those types, the JAG might not be for you either. All right, so I don't see any other questions popping up here. So I want to say thank you for staying on. If you do come to Coastal, or if you're a Coastal student, come look me up. I'd love to talk to you more about being a JAG and again, assisting with even looking over your resume and other materials when you do apply to one of these boards. And I will turn it back over to Eunice at this point and just say thank you.
Your line is now unmuted.
Well, Professor Koling, thank you very much for doing this for us. It was a little nostalgic for me to sit through another lecture of yours. Good old times. It was, of course, as comprehensive and informative as I expected it would be. Thanks to all of our attendees and audience for very actively attending, asking very good questions. Thank you very much. I just want to remind everyone that we have these webinars every 2 weeks. We have a new season of them starting. Just keep an eye out for us. Check our website. We'll put the schedule up there again, and we'll send out invitations as well. So thanks again to everyone, Professor Calling, all the audience, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you again next time in our next webinar. Goodbye from Florida.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.